Theologians say that there are two words used in Hebrew that pertain to the creation story, Bara and Asah, that can be used interchangeably to indicate the creation of something ex-nilio, that is out of nothing, or something created from existing materials. A call to intellectual honesty. At the outset, let it be clear that if one has no need to express these two separate concepts, then the argument of interchangeability could hold. However, if one is trying to document scriptural evidence for two different kinds of creation that happened at separate times, then these words are important and necessary. The danger that this argument for interchangeability hides is a sophistry that amounts to a dogmatic attitude enshrined in a doctrine. Facts be damned. Such an attitude says, I don't believe in a pre-7-day creation, so the distinction between these words is immaterial and doctrinally unimportant. In this case, the preconceived doctrine of young earth becomes a dogmatic denial of scientific and other credible evidence that affirms an old earth creation scenario. So at the outset, we must be aware of our doctrinal prejudice for or against a pre-7 days of creation universe before we can embark on an honest evaluation of the evidences for a gap, as proposed by the proponents of the gap theory. In short, we have two camps of thought on this gap, and we must acknowledge our personal prejudice so we can engage in an honest discourse. Here is a timeline that demonstrates our need to understand our intellectual prejudice as to the nature of the creation of the universe. The ex-nilio event is common between both mainstream science and normative Christian theology. Science calls it the Big Bang, whereas normative Christian theology calls it the 7 days of creation. A big difference between them is that science dates the Big Bang at millions or trillions of years ago, whereas religion assumes that it occurred a mere 6,000 years ago. Both systems of cosmology could say that they have a pre-ex-nilio event. Science would call that any state, condition, or time before the Big Bang, whereas normative Christian theology would say that such a pre-creation era would have occurred any time before God said, "Let there be light." Mainstream science says that evolution created all that exists over billions of years, whereas Christians say that God did it miraculously over a 6,000-year period up until now. Both systems of cosmology rely on the denial of the true data of the other. Science says infinite time plus chance equals everything. No God is needed. This is scientific dogma against a creator. Normative Christian theology says 6,000 years plus God equals everything. No scientific data needed. Sola scriptura, scripture only. This is religious dogma against scientific fact. When you think about this, or when you look at the chart, it is obvious that the scientific natural history simply predates the biblical history. There is no real conflict, besides the contention of when the ex-nilio event took place. Now, based in this plain presentation of two bodies of knowledge, the difference between the Hebrew words bara and asah is required for an honest intellectual discussion. The difference between the scientific creation event and the theological creation event is the difference between out of nothing ex nihilo as opposed to creation out of existing materials. This chart shows us the value of a third alternative viewpoint commonly known as an open mind. The open mind must be willing to accept data that is verifiable. Both sides of the argument have some truth on their side. Mainstream science has the age of the Earth and solar system verified by paleontology and astrophysics. Normative Christian theology has reliable records in the form of the Scriptures, which show the genealogy of the Christ from Adam. Science also affirms this genealogy by genetics, in part by the mitochondrial Eve, which is a woman to whom every living people group on earth today descended from. In the article titled The Demise of Mitochondrial Eve by Brad Harrub, Ph.D., and Bert Thompson, Ph.D., they wrote, Science writer Ann Gibbons authored an article for the January 2nd, 1998 issue of Science titled Calibrating the Mitochondrial Clock, the subheading of which read as follows: Mitochondrial DNA appears to mutate much faster than expected, prompting new DNA forensics procedures and raising troubling questions about the dating of evolutionary events. In that article, she discussed the new data which allowed that the mutation rates used to obtain mitochondrial Eve's age no longer could be considered valid, and concluded, regardless of the cause, evolutionists are most concerned about the effect of a faster mutation rate. For example, researchers have calculated that mitochondrial Eve, the woman whose mitochondrial DNA was ancestral to that in all living people, lived 100,000 to 200,000 years ago in Africa. Using the new clock, she would be a mere 6,000 years old. The open mind will say, these are facts. The open-minded person also realizes that all understanding is at best a working hypothesis to which more understanding and data can be added. So instead of receding into empty, unworkable doctrines of science and religion, let's at least consider what the verifiable truth is telling us about the creation of the world. The scientific ex-nilio is the scientifically verified creation spoken of in Genesis chapter 1, verse 1. The creation story of the Scriptures is verifiable as a secondary event having happened around 6,000 years ago, along with the forming of the primogeniture of the Adamic race. Don't conflate the ex-nilio event with the creation of Earth 6,000 years ago. When you remove the conflation of these two events, you have an accurate timeline which Scripture then speaks to without confusion. Truth does not contradict truth, because the Creator made all things as an expression of His nature.